Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee on the 21st of June 2023. First item on the agenda today is election of chair. Please could I have nominations and seconders for chair?
I nominate Councillor Neil.
A seconder, please.
And I second Councillor
Nomination
Neil.
Councillor Murphy, seconded Councillor Buckler. Okay, we'll move on to the appointment of Vice Chair, and Councillor Neil will proceed with the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel, and thank you. It's an important committee that I chair, and I really welcome all of you to the committee. The engagement of the committee over the last year has been tremendous, and I look forward to it being the same in the year to come. But we'll start right now with the appointment of the Vice Chair. Do I have a nomination? Jill, I see your hand up, and Paul, we'll do Jill and then Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I propose Councillor Laura Wright for Vice Chair.
Thank you. And do I have a seconder?
Yes, Chair.
And thank you to Councillor Crook. And Councillor Pavia?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'd like to nominate Councillor Rachel Buckler.
And do I have a seconder?
Happy to second that.
Thank you. So that means we have two nominated vice chairs, and I think we now need to go to a vote on that, Hazel. So do you want to just briefly conduct that?
Okay, could we please have hands up, a show of hands for Councillor Wright, please? I see 4 online and 1 in the room, that's 5. Could we have a show of hands, please, for Councillor Buckler? Okay, that's 3 in the room. Any online? Paul. Okay, that's 4. I believe then that the chair has a cast-in vote, but that would leave us tied, wouldn't it?
It's 5.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, it appears that Councillor Wright has won that vote. So, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Hazel. And congratulations, Councillor Wright. I was just going to say I invite you to come and join me at the top of the council chamber, but that might be a little tricky. Okay, so we'll move on, and thank you for the nominations. We'll move on with the agenda proper, and if I may possibly, if you'll just permit me to repeat what I briefly mentioned in the pre-meeting, and this is very much for any of the residents or businesses who may be listening in, looking in, or at a future stage. This is the Performance and Overview Committee. It plays an important part in the work of the Council, and its aim is to scrutinise and hold to account the work of the administration, the performance of our services, the performance of the Council, but to do so in a non-partisan way, looking to add value by asking questions about the reports and the performance that we place on the forward plan, with the aim to shed light where we think it's important to do so, to draw attention to areas that look of concern, or it may well be that look of excellent practice and good performance, with the aim of making for better reports, better policies, and hopefully adding value to the work of the Council and making our Council as good as it possibly can be for our residents. So the work is very much based on asking questions, and that's the way we'll proceed. If I could just make sure that our members are of the same mindset, that would be fantastic. We are going to move on with declarations of interest, and I see none, so we'll move forward with Public Open Forum, agenda item 4, and I don't believe we have any, Robert, that we've been notified of. So we'll move on to the first report, and that is of public protection, 2022-2023, the performance report, which Councillor Bond noted, I think it's used the word oversight rather than overview in terms of for the committee. Thank you, Councillor Bond, eagle-eyed as usual. We have with us here David Jones, who's Head of Public Protection, and Linda O'Gorman, who's the officer responsible for licensing. So areas that you would be ready to cover. So first of all, if I may ask David, if you'd be able to pick up the key points of the Public Protection performance report, and we will then open it for questions. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Do you want an introduction from the Cabinet Member, Councillor Birch, who's online, just to kick things off? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Birch, yes, and very colourfully online as well. So Councillor Birch, over to you to kick us off, and then we'll move on with David and questions following that. Well, also Linda with any issues.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a privilege to introduce such a detailed report that sets out the huge range of work that the team undertake and the enormous range of expertise that they have amongst them. It's relied upon to keep everybody safe every day in all kinds of ways, and ensure that businesses are operating legally, which of course is not only important to residents but also to the reputable businesses, that they are not outcompeted by the cowboys. There has been a sort of gradual return to normal post-pandemic. Obviously, during the pandemic, the team really stood up to protect us all, I think, and I'm sure we're all grateful for that. There seem to be some increases in work in certain areas. I'm sure Dave will be able to tell us his view as to whether they are emerging trends or really a catch-up from that pandemic backlog as we go forward. And as always, there are never enough resources for the work to be done, but you will see that the team are largely managing to deal with everything in a timely and satisfactory manner. So that's, as having only just taken over responsibility for public protection, I think that's about all I would like to say at the moment.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Councillor Birch, and we appreciate it. It's something that you've recently taken over as a portfolio. Of course, the administration's been responsible for it for a year now, so we need to have that level of continuity. So it's very important if you're able to take any particular messages that come out of the meeting. That can be itself extremely important. I'll hand over, if I may, to David Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Birch, for the introduction. What I'll do, I won't, because it's quite a meaty report, I'll just point out some of the pertinent points. In terms of the covering reports, I mean, councillors will be conscious that we did come in January, but I think it's because of the delay in getting it on the agenda, on the work programme, so we will be trying to get it to now June, July, after the financial year finishes, in a more timely fashion. So that was on the recommendations from January, hence we're back in June. So I think the report hopefully picks up what's different in the 22-23 year. As Councillor Birch indicates, one of the big factors is obviously the recovery from the pandemic. So I think it's providing services, routine services during the pandemic, which carried on for over 2 years. For us, environmental health, we're actually delivering that service in terms of track and trace service. So it really did have a big impact on those stats, and hopefully the table 1 in the report indicates the pre-pandemic numbers. What happened through the pandemic, so if you look at food hygiene inspections, for example, a massive dip, and then they're recovering now for last year. So I think hopefully 2-3 picks up the main changes if we look back at the last financial year. The service teams are reverting back to more service delivery, having been significantly diverted during that pandemic. Obviously, those alert levels, it was still with us at the beginning of 22-23. We did still have incident management team meetings, which went on till May 2022. So I chaired those in partnership with Aaron Bevan and Public Health Wales. So that did have an impact at the beginning of the year, but that certainly then tailed away as the summer came in. There is some, to assure members, there is still some capacity. We do have an EHO that is fully funded by Welsh Government to pick up some of that residual issues with COVID hasn't gone away completely. Still we get cases. The focus is on care homes. So we have a resource fully funded by Welsh Government that gives us that capacity. Not the same as it was for the previous 2 years, but it does still exist, which is helpful to just keep tabs on clusters, etc., that still do occur within the county. The second one to point out is, yes, there is a return to proactive visits. A healthy 681 premises were visited last year, a marked increase in the previous 2 years. Communicable disease also increased significantly, and that's the non-COVID stuff. I think we'll probably pick up that later, but basically foodborne illnesses such as Salmonella, Campylobacter and other regular communicable diseases did go up significantly last year, so the team responded to that. As per the January report, we had Hugh with us, if you remember, who talked us through the aspects of the public health team's work, which was very much about dealing with statutory nuisance, and you'll see there in the text that nearly 2,500 service requests were received by what is a small team. So they deal with all those sort of neighbour disputes, typically about noise, etc., drainage complaints, air quality, land issues, private sector housing is dealt with by environmental health. So 2,500 was a significant number last year. Trading standards also witnessed that increase last year, 725 last year. And licensing got back to those sort of figures that we used to pre-pandemic. So that gives you a summary of where we're at. 322 animal health visits were undertaken, again showing some return to that pre-pandemic level of service. We did, I think it was reported last time when we looked back at 21-22, we did have a bit of a interesting time, should we say, in terms of trying to navigate all those alert levels and communicating that to businesses and care homes, schools, etc. is quite an onerous task. So we are relieved somewhat that the things have calmed down last year. Event safety group, we probably didn't cover much in January, but I chair that group and Linda here is the vice chair. We have more than most, being the nature of the county, so we deal with the Chepstow racecourses and the Caldecott Castle, Bailey Park events, etc., fireworks. 118 were dealt with last year in terms of helping them mitigate those risks, which can be significant, thousands of people turning up. So they can be music events, sporting events, agricultural, cultural type events. So as I say, we'll endeavour to get here earlier in the year, so June and July, that's referenced there. When it just talks about statutory duties, because there is so much stuff to do with a limited number of staff, 35 staff in total, full-time equivalents, something like special procedures come our way. We've got to recover the costs of that through the cost of the licence. So we can't forever pick up new statutory duties without regard to the capacity that we have to deliver those services. So I think that's probably what I would say in terms of the current report. As I say, the other one there that's helpful is over a year ago now, for April 2022, we did see an investment in public protection, which was really helpful. So there was recognition by members and senior management that actually, if the demand's going up, I think clearly we need to meet that demand. So we did have a £223,000 investment for the financial year 22-23, which is really helpful to ease some of that pressure to deliver those range of services. I'll mention the community and corporate plan probably as we go through. That's the current report, Chair. If I very quickly then look at the Appendix 1, which is obviously the report proper, same format as last time, so hopefully I think members did comment. There's a helpful format as reflected by Councillor Birch. So again, I'm not going to go through the detail because members have had sight of it already, but it does tell you what we deliver, the purposes of those services, the staff resource, so that's broken down into those 4 different teams, the financial resources in section 3.2. There was a slight underspend last year, 22-23. As colleagues to my left will be glad to hear. That was generally due to that underspend. So when I said there's an investment, it inevitably takes time to appoint to those positions. So I think probably 23-24 we'll be closer to a cost-neutral position for this financial year. Performance then, so I picked up the main issues, Chair, so I don't intend going through figure 1, but clearly members may well have questions on that, so I'm going to skip through that. Then section 5 is an analysis of that activity, so each of the service managers reflect on those particular issues, be it food safety, communicable disease. Income generation is something that we'll get back to as we go forward. Health and safety at work, I think general public tend to think it's HSE, but we cover a lot of those premises ourselves, the tyre fitters and the retail and the hotels, etc. Public health, as I say, Hugh, I think, hopefully covered that off quite thoroughly, I think, last January, so I don't think we'll dwell on that. So I think I'll pause there, since we've got Linda with us. So I'll sort of rattle straight to section 5.3, licensing, and I'll hand over to Linda to just summarise the purpose of licensing and those impacts on our communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave, and welcome, Linda.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah. Well, licensing, we are a small team. There's only a few of us, there's 4.5 sort of staff that we had, and we've had a massive change as well recently, where an experienced licensing officer was lucky to go on secondment to Welsh Government to work on the taxi policy, which will formulate part of the legislation and national standards. So that was a good loss to us, really, so we had to sort of appoint somebody to take the place. So it's been a training exercise, and we are a very busy team, as the report says. The type of things that we deal with is quite vast, really. Our biggest ones are the taxi trade, and also stuff under the Licensing Act, which is your pubs, your clubs, your late night refreshments, your takeaways, any entertainment, so any issues with that. And what we found is, it's starting to escalate a bit, a lot of complaints that we're getting from COVID, because a lot of the venues were shut down during that period, and now it's like back to normal again. So there's a number of issues that we have to deal with. So like the taxis, you've got scrap metal, you've got gambling, so you've got your race course, you've got your betting shops, you've got your amusement arcades, and that can be even things down to just raffles, which is highlighted in Appendix 1, which is 5.31 of the report. In licensing, we don't just deal with the application process and any policies and any legislative changes, and it was massive for us during the COVID pandemic, because as you can imagine, we was getting announcements from Welsh Government basically saying things like the pubs can only serve inside, or they can only serve outside, they can only have so many. It was changing constantly, and it was different to the English standards, and us being on the border, it was quite a challenge really for our team. And we are starting to see a lot more pubs now actually applying for licences. Now they've come out of it, we seem to be having quite a number more that's coming our way. But like I said, licensing isn't just processing applications. We deal with inspections, we deal with problematic sort of premises, we deal with a lot of reports that goes to committee if there's any issues in the applications. So that is a lot of things tied up, and the report also highlights that the type of joint working that we actually carry out with the likes of immigration, because they are a statutory consultee under the Licensing Act, for the entertainment industry and shops that may appoint somebody who hasn't got the right to work. And also we look at sort of safeguarding measures. That's high on our agenda as well. Not only ensuring we've got the right drivers in taxis, but also working with the Licensing Act, the entertainment industry, the hospitality sector as well. And there's one I've highlighted in the report, which comes out because we used to work closely with a lady in police and has been taken over by somebody new now. We did a lot of work because unlike taxi drivers where they have to have safeguarding training as part of the policy. We can't do that for hospitality, but we do work closely with them because they want to get the best out of their venue as well. And we give guidance, especially on hotels, of what to look out for, you know, if you've got any concerns and how to report it. And it's getting that message out there. And recently we did, it's National Licensing Week recently, and it's getting a message out where you can go, where you can report things, what sort of stuff that we deal with as well. And this report highlights that. So I won't go into too much detail because most of it is in that, but it's quite varied, the work that we carry out for a small team.
Thanks, Linda. So, yeah, I'm conscious the Chair's intro is more about member questions, so I won't be much longer, Chair. But, yeah, just in terms of housing, I did skip straight past that. I think private sector housing has been quite pertinent last year. The end of 521, I think, the other thing, I think, having come on in January is to try and sort of spruce it up a bit with some stories as well. There's a nice one there in 521, if members haven't had a chance to see that one, with an intervention from the EHO regarding residents in a temporary house accommodation. So they've been struggling with that accommodation, really low standards, no insulation, heating, not maintained by the landlord, serious rat infestation. So to summarise, they've moved to some B&B accommodation which is warm and clean. One of the residents said they cried when they were able to wash their hands in warm water for the first time in months. So I just want to say thank you because of ex-EHO's actions and the respect he showed our residents is brilliant, and that's from a local councillor. So that's just one example. We sometimes there's a bit of a focus on complaints. I think it's the nature of our work, but it's always helpful to have compliments as well. And just finally, before I sort of summarise at the end, is obviously Environmental Health also involved with the Ukrainian host scheme. So they did look at all those houses to make sure they were fit for purpose and safe for taking on Ukrainian displaced persons. So that was another aspect of the work, particularly that featured last year. So like I say, I'm not going to go through the trading standards stuff. Gareth Walters was here last time. Event Safety Group, just quickly skipping to 5.5. Welcome any questions on that, but it is a busy part of what we do to try and make sure those events are safe. I think if you think about public safety, then clearly if you've got up to 30,000 people turning up, it's good that we have overview to make sure that's done in a safe manner as possible, working with those organisers accordingly. Lessons learned, members did refer to that last January, so we have tried to think on that and what can we sort of learn from those experiences. Something is about prioritisation. How do we work more efficiently? If the demand goes up 18%, which it has in the 4-year period, then how do we actually react to that as best we can? So it is about prioritising what we do. And also the software system. We are moving to a cloud-based software system that should be beneficial to both officers and the users of those services, for example, payments and licenses, to release time for the front line, which would be really beneficial.
Dave, so I'm going to see if we can just ask you to move to the conclusion in this, because I do want to open it for questions and allow members questions.
Yeah, so in summary, so I think performance summary was picked up in the current report, and then finally then, Chair, is obviously going forward. Welcome questions about how we now adapt. Now we're through the pandemic. The business plans is a mechanism clearly to reflect on your community and our, should I say, community corporate plan. Obviously we link to those things about safe places, green spaces, etc. is very much part of our work. And I think probably I'll stop there, Chair. Collaborative opportunities and other things as per the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Linda, for the summary and for the report. Could I just ask for any questions that colleagues may have? Councillor Pavia, first.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Dave and Linda, for providing the overview of the report. I've got 2-3 questions. Just want to focus in on 5.1 environmental health on the commercial side. 5.11 looking at food safety, and particularly the primary authority partnership portfolio, and you've said we've widened that and working with National Food Bank provider and the Royal Borough of Greenwich. Just want to unpick that a little bit more. Obviously, we're always looking for innovative ways to expand our income streams to ensure that we're not just covering costs, but we're also trying to bring money into the authority. But there's obviously a balance there, ensuring that we've got sufficient capacity to meet our own performance indicators and standards. So I just want to be assured, really, that we're not overstretching ourselves in supporting other organisations and authorities with capacity or advice or training. That we've got sufficient capacity to ensure we need to do what we need to do. Health and safety at work. I'm just trying to understand where that segues in with the HSE and reporting with HSE. Now I've had some residents, and they may be part of the figures in that table, who've reported issues, hazard spotting, particularly around building sites, unsecure building sites, poor storage of tools, etc. I just wonder how we work across the authority with colleagues in building compliance to support residents in hazard spotting. And I know residents have been a bit disappointed in the past when they've raised issues of concern. Officers have gone out to site to have a look. Officers have come back to residents and said, this is not an issue that we deal with. You need to report it to health and safety executive. But I just want to understand where the burden of responsibility lies then in reporting to HSE. A lot of members of the public may not be ill-equipped to do that or undertake that report or understand the processes. If we're made aware of that, should we be reporting that to the HSE? Are we doing that? And the final question, looking at fair trading, 5.43. And it's around the crackdown of illegal sale of vapes, but also the illegal trading, importing and trading of vapes. Now, this is obviously an issue of this probably linked to organised crime. So there'll be police and other statutory agencies involved in this. But I just wonder how we're working with traders to make them aware of, say, their licensing responsibilities in terms of sale of vapes to underage children. But we probably saw the issue in Kidderminster about a month ago. Illegal vapes and the concentrates of particles, chromium, nickel, etc. in those vapes. Are we working with the schools to make them aware of the dangers of potentially buying illicit products? Obviously the cost of living is pinching everyone in their pocket, and the trade in illegal tobacco and illegal vapes, I think, is something that we just need to be conscious of.
Councillor Pavey, I'm just conscious we've got quite a number of questions ahead, so I'm going to just stop you there if I may, and we'll focus on those three. What I'm going to do, Dave, is I'm going to group the first two questioners together. So if you're able to, are you happy with that? If I ask also, and welcome to a new member to the committee, Councillor Fuchs. I see your hand up too, Councillor Fuchs.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I do have a question and an observation. So my question is around food hygiene. Back before the pandemic, we trained 208 people in food hygiene, and now it's 0. So I'd just like to understand why that is. And the second point, just a very brief observation at 5.3.4, I was delighted to raise the issue of the of the gambling premises with the licensing committee, because that gambling premises is in my ward and there were some real concerns raised. So I just want to say that I was really pleased with how that was dealt with by the licensing committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fuchs. Thank you, Councillor Fuchs. And if I may ask David to pick up on those and if you could keep your responses reasonably succinct, we'll move on to some other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Parver. So, the first one was regarding that sort of balance between doing what we need to do in terms of enforcing authority and perhaps having some income stream to promote primary authorities. So there is a balance to be struck. We do think the primary authority work is important. It provides consistency. So a primary authority for brains. So rather than everyone doing things slightly differently, we have that host role to ensure consistency across that property portfolio. So that's been really beneficial, and there is a charge for that. The access scheme is something else that we're encouraging, which is a consultancy type service. We're always very conscious, so we would never forfeit our enforcement role for the benefits of chasing the pound, if you like. So the balance is there, and hopefully that's reflected in the table. If we can manage 681 visits, then clearly we can. We have got the capacity then to cover off some of the work that's like a consultancy service in effect. So hopefully that picks that up. Health and safety is a bit confusing in terms of who does what. The enforcing authority regs picks up exactly who does what. Once you get into the realms of construction, HSE are in charge of building sites. But then sometimes it's pre-construction, isn't it? I know we had a site in Bulwark that may be the issue you're referring to. We tend to start with building control and planning. Where's that building status? Because you want to get back to the developer to ask them where they're at, and they obviously need to secure that site in terms of both of those disciplines. So we would try and liaise with HSE to make sure they're aware of it. But some of these things do fall within the gaps slightly, but the enforcing authority regs generally determines who does what. It can be a bit unsatisfying, but hopefully next time I think we learned from that particular experience and it can be a bit more consistent with the advice. Fair trading and vapes, we did do a sting type operation recently to pick up that very issue about the problems with illegal vapes and underage sales. Unfortunately, the intelligence back is they'll tend to sell to their regular punters. So it's really difficult. So we had no sales to underage persons. That was, as I say, a prepared sting type operation. But we did follow that up with letters to all those premises that do sell vapes to remind them of their responsibilities accordingly. So there is work being done on that. Gareth Walters can expand on that if you required, Councillor. And working with schools, good question. So again, I think I can go back and speak to Gareth directly to see what we've done. But I know him and his TSO colleagues have been doing some work specifically on vapes, and there's a national drive to tackle that as well. Then the second one then, Councillor Folks picked up about food hygiene. The food hygiene training, 208 to 0, sounds a bit alarming, isn't it? There are other opportunities with the private sector to provide hygiene training. It's something that's in the work plan now for 23-24 to get back to that training. Obviously, over that 2-year period, lots of premises were shut through the alert levels, so it was a rocky time, but certainly it's something, because we know the premises and it's not seen as a big stick type operation. I think we'll be reverting back to that hygiene training forthwith, because it's something that's really well received by the premises, and it's also another useful income stream as well. I'll hand over to Linda for the final part regarding licensing. Thank you.
I think actually, Linda, that was more a comment than a question. So I'm keen
just
that
thank him for the work done. Thank you. Thanks.
I'm keen that we keep the time open for members' questions as much as possible. And on the vapes issue, I'm sure colleagues will recall the 2 young adults that we had at one of our full council meetings in the autumn who highlighted their concerns that vapes were, I think, in their top 3 issues of concern, and certainly was an eye-opener to me, a wake-up call. I'm moving on with questions from Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for the report, and it is very diverse and really interesting, and thank you, Dave and Linda. And it's obviously been wonderful work recovering from COVID, so well done all of you. Brilliant. I've got my particular questions. I've got a few questions because it is so diverse. Sorry, there's little ones. So about the noise, is there a plan to improve the closure within 3 months? Because I see that it's, is that a necessary or reasonable target to be trying to achieve? Because I've actually got residents who've got issues in this area. And the other questions I've got about private water supplies, we've got a responsibility to risk assess, is this an opportunity for income generation, or do we get any income generation from it? And the other one was good to hear about the Welsh Government, well, it's a Welsh Government initiative to reducing single-use plastics. It's been taken up, I can see. And what does the environmental TSO and what other work is that person involved with, please?
Thank you, Councillor Bond. I'm going to do the same thing again, if we may, and ask Councillor Buckler, who we welcome to the committee as well. I think you had a question.
Yes, I have. I'm going to ask the questions before Councillor Bonds are
yeah, I'm grouping them together, Councillor Buckler, if that's okay. And
so you can have a long answer. Fair enough. The food safety full inspections, are they flagged up or timetabled inspections? And the inspections at high-risk premises and upper-medium premises, could you give a definition, please, so one can have clarity? And has a formal programme being instituted on these inspections? Do you think that complaints have increased since the pandemic? Has people's perception shifted? And I'm interested in how regulations vary from England to Wales. Are there things that you think we should be doing in Wales that England do, or vice versa? And how helpful would it be to try and coordinate these better? Because you're saying there is a problem. Environmental protection, fouling, littering, fly tipping, etc. Is there an education programme that we could put together that can be given to school children? It is an endemic problem, isn't it? The lack of awareness or care that some people have for the environment, which of course makes things difficult for lots of residents, but it has to start with the child telling the parent not to throw the litter out of the car, etc. Small example.
Councillor Buckler, I'm going to hold you. I'm counting 5 questions there, and I'm just
fair enough. That's enough.
I'm not saying it's too many. I'm just saying I think we'll handle these first of all. But Dave, if you could start, please, with Councillor Bond's questions on noise.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So in terms of noise, looking at that, 79% closed in 3 months. Some are long-running disputes, so it's through no fault of the officer. Sometimes these things can take a long time. So you'll have noise complaints regarding the duelling of the heads of the valleys. So you're not going to close that off necessarily. You'll monitor it and do your best to do that. But some are very quick. A barking dog potentially could be something that's done fairly rapidly, or noise from stereos. So we've had some success in getting those resolved. But I think you'll never get. I think if you look at the stats, isn't it, there's been a bit of a drop from our sort of best performance, about 88, 89%. You're never going to get to 100% because of those difficult cases. Generally, people aren't coming back just to complain about it, it's taking forever. And you can imagine it's quite contentious. You've got feuding neighbours very often. So we're doing our best, but certainly something that Hugh's very aware of, who's responsible for that area of service. I'm going to rattle through them fairly quickly. Private water supplies, yes, that's done. That does generate income in terms of going out to sample those water supplies. We also obviously do risk assessments of the supplies, be it a borehole, spring water, etc., so that is all done on an income generation basis, which has increased year on year, so the money's returned on that. Welsh Government and single-use plastics, now as a comment, yes, training standards will be picking that up. Councillor Butler, give me a...
Sorry, can I just pause for 1 second?
Yep,
Councillor Bond, you have your hand up. Is it a quick one just on this?
Yes, please. I wasn't referring to, you've just quoted the within 3 working days, which is really good and wonderful. So those longer ones has always been about around 40, 50%. So I'm just suggesting that the 3-month target for those really difficult ones isn't a reasonable target. So should it be 6 months? So you don't beat yourself up for no reason. That's what I'm trying to suggest. So the 3 month target was 53%.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. Useful comments. I'm sure actually we do it. I think it was just trying to sort of summarise. We probably do the 6 month indicator as well. But yeah, helpful to understand the ones that do take longer and what the reasons are. But yeah, take that comment
perhaps
on
you
board.
can take that one away and
Yeah,
consider
certainly.
that. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Butler, excuse me if I've missed anything, but the Councillor Butler referred to food safety inspections. Yes, they are all risk assessed, so it's A to E. You'll see those gradings on the 1 to 5 actually on the windows. 5 being the better ones, 0 actually if you've got no star rating at all. That is in compliance with the FSA, the governing body that covers food safety. So FSA Wales auditors every year to see how we're getting on with those inspections, so that number will pick up all the ABCs. So it's a bit confusing. We call them ABCs, they call them 0 to 5s. But to summarise, yeah, they all are all risk assessed, and we do obviously comply with that programme. So we did achieve the FSA recovery plan for 22-23 last year. So we did cover off that. Have complaints increased? They have. I think probably during the pandemic it's because a lot of people are working from home, so they did start complaining about the neighbours where they hadn't before because they weren't there. So I think that was a factor, and it's very weather dependent. People having barbecues and the windows open increases noise complaints, so I think the increase in complaints can be explained. England versus Wales, a lot of our legislation is Westminster, comes out as Environment Protection Act, etc. Most of the EU food safety requirements are Westminster based. Is there any learning from the two? Well, COVID was quite interesting, wasn't it? We had different regulations to England, and that caused us some significant problems with cross-border issues in terms of pupils, etc., and care homes with workers and staff on different sides of the borders with different regulations. Events was problematic. Then you mentioned fly tipping and litter. We do work closely with waste colleagues, Carl Tuig and his teams, to promote that. So I know there is work, probably sat more in Carl's team in terms of engaging with schools to ensure that. But I'll certainly take that away and raise that as to what we're currently doing in terms of, as you say, educating the youngsters to ensure they're not litter, fly tipping, all those enviro crimes you referred to. So hopefully that covers that.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. That's very helpful. Linda, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just on the legislation side of it. I mean, I highlighted the fact, and Dave just referred to it. You know, it was different during the pandemic. Changes in the hospitality when they can and can't open, as opposed to Wales. And with regards to other forms of licences, our biggie being the hospitality under the Licensing Act, is the same legislation in England and Wales. Gambling is the same in England and Wales. Taxis, it is devolved to the Welsh Government, but they are working closely with the Department of Transport that does the England side for policy changes and new legislation that may come in. And like I said, Lee Beach, who is one of our enforcement officers, is actually working with them in Welsh Government as well. That being said, you know, we are still governed by the same legislation in England and Wales at the moment, but is due to change with regards to new legislation coming through eventually. There's a bill out at the moment that's out for consultation, which has just ended actually. So,
thank you. Thank you, Linda. That's very helpful. I'm just going to add, if I may, a couple of thoughts. I note the comment that it's now a struggle, quotes just about a quote, to take on new statutory work. That's a bit of a red flag, I think. Statutory work is statutory work, and if you're highlighting that you may struggle to take it on, I think we should have some due concern around that. Concerned about the scam reports and vulnerable scam reports, which are such an enormous risk now to pretty well every household, but the most vulnerable in our community are those who are particularly preyed upon, and whether or not that's something that you might wish to look at, that public protection may need the support of other services within the council to try and make sure we're getting the right messages out there in terms of trying to make sure that people protect their own security from scams in various forms. The last one is again not something I'd be particularly looking for a response on now, but perhaps something we could follow through, and I'll be looking on the forward work plan, and that is in terms of lessons learned from COVID. People who we might all want to listen to are scientists and leading the health organizations around the world tell us there will be another pandemic, and again it's a question of when, not a question of if. They've also said we got away lightly, many of them, with the last one for a variety of reasons. What more could we do as a county council to prepare for the next pandemic, such that we're not simply waiting for a national government to give us directives, what lessons are learned and what we might want to do more or differently, but something that I'm happy we pick up separately and beyond the meeting. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the responses. Thanks for the questions, everybody. I'm going to move us on, but first just to the recommendations for that report, to consider and comment on the contents of this report and Appendix 1, entitled the Public Protection Performance Report 22-23, and noting the breadth of services provided, and members considering whether they'd like to scrutinise any other specific area of public protection work. So I move the report, we've considered it, and I believe that is widely supported. I see no suggestion of otherwise from members. We'll move on now, if I may, to the next report, which is, and I welcome Peter Davis and Jonathan Davis, and thank you, David and Linda. Thank you very much for your full responses and presentation. Appreciate it. I welcome Peter Davis and Jonathan Davis to the meeting, and also to Councillor Garrick, who I see on screen, and again very colourfully so, Councillor Garrick, and welcome you to the meeting. We're looking at the 22-23 Budget Monitoring Outturn Report, Revenue and Capital Outturn, and perhaps I can start by going over to Councillor Garrick, and you may want to then pass through to Peter and to Jonathan.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Chair, and obviously thank you very much to both Jonathan and Peter for the report, which I appreciate has taken significant amounts of resources, love, blood, sweat and tears to produce for us. So you have the report in front of you. You will see that the headline is that we are looking at a deficit at outturn of £3,503,000, which requires a contribution from our earmarked reserves. If you cast your mind back to the in-year budget recovery, you will recall that that was some £6 million in anticipation, and we are actually looking at an improved position coming out of the year from the in-year anticipated position of some £2.5 million. We are aware that reserves are low and have been low for several years, and that additional 2,500 that we will not be calling on will be welcome into our reserves. In terms of the drivers on the budget deficit, they remain the drivers that we discussed at outturn reports throughout the financial year. So we are aware of the high need for social services, particularly in children's social care, which is particularly vulnerable to children needing care, and that coming at a high cost. That's looking at just over £4 million for children's social care and £367,000 overspend in terms of adult social care. In addition to that, we're looking at an overspend of £881,000 for additional learning needs. That's mostly in terms of replacement costs. And we're also looking at the high level of homelessness and the demand on the council there, where we have had responsibilities placed by Welsh Government on councils across Wales, and where homelessness has not been something that has been dealt with previously, we're seeing increased costs. It has been dealt with, but not to this level, and that is an overspend of £1.35 million. In addition to that, you will all be aware of the unprecedented level of inflation last year. That has been reflected in the pay awards negotiated through Welsh Government, and is just over £2 million above budgeted level. There is offset, which you have seen here in the outturn report, end of year outturn report. That includes late receipt of unbudgeted grants towards the back end of the year, improved income in areas such as Mon Life. We are aware that we are carrying staff vacancies, and some of those have contributed to a reduction in spend. And we've also seen a higher than expected investment and council tax incomes as well. In addition to that, we've seen over income return from our insurance policies at the end of the year. You have the report in front of you. Detail is, as ever, in the appendices as much as the report itself. You will pick up on the capital programme having slipped by 42%. You will also pick up on 4 schools coming into deficit. That was projected to be 10 schools in year. We have worked very closely with the schools to minimise the impact wherever possible, and we're hoping to continue to drive that down. I think really at that point, Chair, I'm quite happy to hand over to John or Peter if they would like to add further, and obviously over to yourself as well.
Thank you, Councillor Garrick. And just opening it up for John or Peter. It looks like, John, you're taking the microphone.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Garrick for giving that comprehensive explanation at the outset. I think my input will probably be just to complement some of that. I think we've been through some of those key reasons for those variances. I think it's important to note that improvement since the last forecasting period has been significant. It has reduced our need to call on reserves. Some of that was planned, and we'd reported that through the year in terms of extending capitalisation direction, looking for additional grant income, and certainly some of those were notified late in the year. But I think importantly, we need to recognise the work that services have put in to deliver on that budget recovery action, and I think that reflects positively. It's noted in the report there around 1.7 million additional improvement since that budget recovery plan came on the table, and that does reflect positively on the services and the action they've taken through the year to constrain costs, identify new income opportunities where possible. In terms of our reserves, and I think this is an important focus for us, you'll note in the report that those usable revenue reserves, so those that are not specific to schools or to services, have reduced by just over £3 million as a result of primarily funding that deficit. That leaves us with just under £20 million in terms of usable reserves as an authority, with a further £4 million of that committed over the medium term. So that still remains at a low level on an all Wales basis, and I think of particular note our investor redesign and kind of service redesign reserves are forecast to be extinguished by the end of the 23-24 financial year. What that means is effect that our service redesign is reliant on being achieved through our capitalisation direction, which will continue in 23-24, which will deplete our capital receipts balances. I think in terms of reserve levels, I think probably if we went back maybe 10, 15 years, I think, 15 million of uncommitted usable reserves could be judged as sufficient for an authority our size. But I think we need to view this now in light of the increasing demand on services, the cost pressures we're seeing coming through, and below inflation funding settlements. The upcoming medium-term financial strategy will look to do further work on reserves and put shape to that strategy going forward. And we'll be looking to align those reserve levels with both the demands on the services that are coming through and changing, but also those commitments within the community and corporate plan which has been approved. I think importantly, just in terms of our schools balances, it is important to note there that the final draw on balances was lower than we expected during the year. We received additional income towards the year end. Ukrainian funding was able to be passported through and cover some costs there that were relevant. And I think schools probably chose not to invest as significantly as planned towards the end of the year, probably with a view on what's going to be another tough year for 23-24 and onwards. I think, in terms of schools, we just need to be conscious that that legacy impact of the pandemic remains. They were given significant grant funding during that period of the pandemic, but those needs within our children continue. Those developmental needs, the catch-up needs, particularly in our secondary cohorts. Councillor Garrick mentioned the level of capital slippage, which is significant. We've taken a review of that, and 60% of that related to 8 of our larger schemes where external influences have been significant, supply chain, inflationary, but also resourcing some of that stuff internally. So I think there's a point we've taken away, in particular to review that plan going forward. Have we got the right resource to be able to deliver on what is a significant amount in 23-24. So I think to summarise, Chair, I think we have to view it positively given where we came to the committee earlier in the year when we were talking figures getting on towards £10 million at the time in terms of some of that overall pressure. It does give us a little bit more financial resilience going into another difficult year in 23-24, but we have to be mindful of those reserve levels. It's going to be important, I think, as the report says, that any future use of those reserves is made wisely and prudently, and the benefits of that is maximised and not simply covering off service overspends. Capitalisation direction will continue to have an important role for us as we move into 23-24. It's going to help aid in some of that service redesign, which is going to be key in delivering on some of those efficiencies and £10 million of savings targets that services have got during the year. I think, as we kind of look towards 23-24, the demand for services is increasing. We still are in an uncertain economic environment. Inflation, again this morning, proving to be quite resilient to the action being taken by the MPC. We still have significant recurring pressures coming through, so 99% of our pressures for the year concentrated themselves in just 5 main areas: social care, homelessness, additional learning needs, and some central CYP costs. So, whilst we've accommodated the majority of those within the budget process for the new year. We need to keep a close eye on those. The particular focus is going to be in terms of the volatility of the social care position. We are continuing to put arrangements in place to closely manage that, but we have to have regard to the challenging local and national parameters. They've been well documented, and they are explained in the report. But that key work is still going to be around early intervention in some of our children's cases, and in terms of adults, planning those packages of care in terms of using less costly arrangements, which is going to be a challenge as we go into 23-24. Chair, I think I'll leave it there, and I think I want to open it up to questions of the committee, and we can respond as appropriate.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that, and also just to recognise the comments that have been already made. What a year, and what a challenging year. I'd like to say it's good to have that one behind us, but we're right in the middle of another one, so we need to keep it going. I'm going to start with Councillor Fuchs, who had her hand up first.
Thank you so much. Yeah, a very, very challenging year, and thank you for taking us through it, Councillor Garrett, and the officers. So, a couple of things. First of all, you talked about the capital slippage, and of course, that slipped by 42%, and we're all really worried about that. And I know it was an unprecedented year, but can you please explain a little bit more about that? And where that leaves us going forward. My second question is around, given that it is going to be another tough year for us, have you thought about all income generation possibilities? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fuchs. These might require us to focus on them as we go through, so I'll stop at that and ask Jonathan, Pete and Councillor Garrett to address those. Who would like to pick that one up?
Thanks, Chair. So in terms of capital slippage, it was a very high transfer this year. Personally, having worked in major infrastructure projects for around 25 years now, last year was particularly unprecedented coming out of the global pandemic in terms of two things. One, prices of raw materials, and two, availability of materials and equipment. So that has had an impact on many construction projects, and obviously our major construction projects are in the capital programme, particularly looking at Much, the Crick Road, the Abergavenny School, and that does stall those projects, and that is a international issue that has been ongoing, and one that is very much followed everywhere. In terms of what going forward, we are planning, or we will be, and I've already asked for a review of our forecasting to make sure that we are on point with where we anticipate to be spending and exactly how pragmatic and accurate we are in those reviews going forward. John, Pete, is there anything that you would like to add on that particular piece?
Thank you, Chair. I think from my perspective, by their very nature, capital schemes will often span more than 1 year. I'm not going to say it doesn't cause a particular issue for us. I think where it's important is in terms of our borrowing that supports the capital programme, which is extensive, and getting a hold on the timing of that is important. So that's where the complication primarily focuses itself. I think what we've seen over the past maybe 3 to 4 years is the considerable number of specific grant schemes that have come into the programme. I was looking through it some weeks ago, sadly, and we have over 65 active schemes which are solely funded from grant, and that draws a significant resource away, both in terms of support services, but also with those budget holders tasked with delivering on those schemes. So I think it's right and proper that we ask budget holders to consider their plans for 23-24. Are they realistic in terms of those issues that Councillor Garrick has rightly outlined? And that's something that we're taking through now over the next coming weeks to challenge budget holders on that fact.
Thank you, John. I'm going to move on to Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Did you want a response on the opportunities for capital to increase income?
Yes, I thought you'd concluded your responses, so by all means.
I'm so sorry. No, just to say essentially that was considered heavily during our budget setting process for this year. We had a significant shortfall to consider, and we did plan in increases which in that budget planning process, obviously we will look to go forwards, but we believe those are realistic and appropriate, and they have, those targets have very much helped to reduce some of the measures that we've had to put in place to stretch the budget this year. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And not surprisingly, most of what I was going to ask you covered in your report, John, including the capitalisation directive. With the delays in the replacement local development plan, that's inevitably going to give us delays in capital receipts. We're relying heavily on the capitalisation directive now for service redesign. How do you see that going? It's not really sustainable at the current level, is it?
John?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Garrick. The question I thought was being put to John.
Okay, I'll leave it to John. No worries.
Okay, thanks, Chair. We have used it extensively, Councillor Murphy, since I think 2019-20. As it stands, the medium-term financial plan looks to reduce that usage considerably in the 2024-25 year, down to just £500,000 a year. So our forward plans are looking to create a more sustainable path for the revenue budget and turn off that prop that we have in there. But I think it's important to note, as we said in the report, that the actions that and outcomes that are driving from this use, we have to capture those and put those into our future operating models. What we have seen, I think, in terms of the capital receipts, there is some revisions to our forecasts over the next few years. Those are bespoke receipts rather than those, as you say, linked to the RDLP. What it does give us is a little bit of headroom there for either extending that into supporting our capital programme, or alternatively, we have got a programmed use of receipts there in terms of supporting capitalisation direction. But you're quite right to identify that risk, and I think it's something we've identified in the medium-term financial strategy as a need to look at and reduce it.
Councillor Garrick, my apologies, I didn't realise you wished to come in on this, but just on the issue of capital receipts.
Sorry, Chair, I think John, as the officer, has covered that absolutely ably. I don't think I could probably add anything more that the committee would find of benefit there. Okay,
thank you very much. And I'm going to move across to Councillor Bond, who has her hand up.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much for the presentation, all of you, and well done to all the teams for the savings and the grants that have been identified and used. I wondered, I've got a couple of questions, two questions. First one is the underspend in implications. So particularly in communities in place, highways and flooding and asset management, there are vacancies. I wonder if these have an impact on the performance of these groups, and whether they're delivering in a timely fashion and whatever. And also the other one is about resources and the losses. For example, Newport Leisure Park, a loss of 109k. I think if I've read that right. So when do we start looking at the long-term view? Is it time to sell that off for £1 or whatever, and perhaps review the learning for the purchase of that in the first place? And whether that we need to do that sort of thing in the future. And also Castlegate, why there was a loss. I understood locally there was a Caldecott Musical Theatre Society who wanted to use that place, and we were told it was full up of people renting it. So I'm surprised that there's such a big loss from that. So please, could you explain that? I'm sure there's a reason, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. And Councillor Garrett, did you wish to come first of all then?
Yeah, absolutely. So the income from both of those particular pieces of estate we review absolutely regularly, and I think both Peter and John will quite honestly tell you they're probably bored of hearing me ask them about the progress on that. With Spitty in particular, we've been watching the situation very carefully, particularly in terms of Cineworld going into administration in the USA. It seems that is particularly safe at the moment, is looking safe at the moment. We've made progress in reletting the Inflate area of the park after that went into administration. We unfortunately lost the intended Karen's Diner there, which I was particularly looking forward to going to, as I think I would be their key clientele. But we are currently looking to relet that. There are several units that are not currently in operation, and the estates team under Nick Keys is working very hard to do that, to cover those. With retrospect, the timing of that purchase was not the best, as we slipped into a global pandemic, and the entertainment industry suffered that greatly, and that's gone then into a recession where everybody has struggled to afford to use that type of facility, and the costs and overheads of running those facilities have become high, particularly in terms of food outlets, and we do have several food outlets in that area as well. In terms of Castlegate, I think this administration is quite clearly not supportive of the council purchasing areas, parts of estate, and then moving community groups on. That's not something that we would have chosen to do. Unfortunately, when we came in to the administration, that particular piece of estate had been fitted out and is currently under lease to Wonder Group, which was a smaller client in that particular building, and they've taken over further space there. They have benefited from an initial deal of rent abatement going forward, but I think that is due to kick in soon. And again, it's been particularly trying times, and fortunately the timing of those purchases was not beneficial for the council. Going forward, I think our strategy will be very different in where we would like to invest. In terms of moving those particular pieces of estate on at this stage, and again, we've considered it. We do need to consider that we borrowed to purchase those, and we have significant repayments to make on those. I would not be considering leaving those. I would not like the council to consider letting those particular investments go at a loss. We have to consider the repayments and the gap that we would make on that should we do so. And at the moment, the property market in this area is not positive, so we are looking to continue and to look to increase and turn those into positive returns.
Thank you, Councillor Garrick. John, I think that was very thorough, and if there was anything you wanted to add, please do. Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to Councillor Buckler, who's got her hand up.
Thank you, Chair. As part of your role to have effective budget monitoring in place, how closely are you working with children's services, bearing in mind last year the overspend of over £4 million? It's obviously a major concern. And how can we as a council safeguard another year of against running into deficit? Are you content with these strategies in place to prevent more delving into our reserves? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. Councillor Garrick, did you want to?
Go on. So I think in terms of the finer detail of the work that's been going on with children's services, I believe probably Pete and John are the best place to do that, but we are working incredibly closely with children's services, and particularly with Jane as the chief officer there, to ensure that those costs are minimised in terms of where we're not minimised as in we're not spending, but are controlled appropriately, and that we do constrain the budget outlay there. You will have seen from the 2023 to 2024 budget that there are clear targets in social services to constrain the spend and to make savings. We believe that we are bringing that into a place that will be a better position, but Peter can give you a lot more information on that in terms of ensuring that we are safeguarding going forward in terms of our spend. We are currently very aware of the demanding nature of this year's budget, and we are therefore looking at early doors whether we need to do budget recovery and what we would need to ensure that. What we need to do is very much understand that when month 2 arrives as an outturn, it's essential that we understand that the granularity on the year end will not be there, and there is likely to be travel on the forecast for month 2, and we do need to ensure that as a council we do continue to deliver services and not have a knee-jerk reaction on something that will actually give greater granularity going forwards. Peter, John, would you, Chair, if you're okay with it, would you guys like to come in?
Councillor Garrick, just on what you've just said, if I may, you're indicating some concerns on month 2.
Yes, I don't believe month 2 will be absolutely without forecasted deficit. I don't think there has been a year in the council's running where we've not anticipated a deficit. It is not unusual, but we do need to ensure that we treat that with the caution that you should treat a month 2 report with, but obviously respond proportionately and cautiously.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Garrick. Pete, John, one of you want to add anything to that?
Thanks. Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Executive, Chief Officer for Resources and Section 151 Officer for the Council. So let's just get that one out of the way at the beginning. Probably a couple of things. First off, I think to the question just in terms of budget management arrangements and specifically those that centre around social care. I think the point specifically was around children's services. And to the point that Councillor Garrick's made, we've, and I think acknowledged through reports, budget setting, outturn, the strengthening of those arrangements. We're meeting regularly, more regularly, with and in separate ongoing discussions around both risks, budgetary risks that we carry separately around adult social care and children's services, because the nature of those risks are different and they need to be approached differently. And I think all members will be aware, just in terms of the extent and the nature of the budget savings and the budget savings mandates that were brought through the budget for the current year, for 23-24, both for children's services and adults. And that's off the back of, and let's recognise here, we're talking about the current year, but the item that's being scrutinised here is the outturn report. But the outturn report clearly and also featured areas of both overspend and risk. So I think I'm comfortable in terms of the arrangements that we've got in place. It's a massive thanks, I think, to the ongoing diligence and hard work of not just John's senior finance colleague Tyrone Stokes, who oversees matters of finance within social care, but more so, I think, Chief Officer Jane Rogers, who's on the call here today, and two relatively new heads of service, in Jenny and Diane, across adults and children, and they've really engaged purposefully and well in those regular conversations. I think, to be honest with you, there were circumstances that led us in the outturn to the level of significant overspend. I think I'm more comforted, and I got to touch wood because this is a volatile area in terms of particularly looked after children, and the way that can fluctuate and be volatile during any particular year. So I've got to just sprinkle a degree of caution on that. But I'm comforted, I think, by the good work that's going on in terms of affecting the levels of sort of change that are needed to make sure that we control cost. Adult social care won't be a surprise to you, in the sense that that presents ongoing levels of risk, and that's borne by a number of reasons I'm not going to go into in levels of detail, but we're aware of them in terms of the market fragility and inflation playing its own part there. So, but I'm comfortable in terms of the robustness of the approach that we're looking to take. But notwithstanding that, and I think it covers therefore the second part, it's around the known budgetary risks that we were carrying. They were referenced in the report that we landed in council in March, and council consciously approved the budget on the basis of that being on the best estimate of risk and our estimate of costs for the current year, notwithstanding the fact that there were levels of unknown. There were still further risks, and I think we've talked to these previously, Chair. They are similar risks that we had last year that continue to manifest in the current year, but in slightly different forms. Pay award, inflation. You'll have seen the news today that things seem to have taken a slight twist yet again in terms of inflation, maybe not abating to the degree that we were hoping, and certainly the Treasury was probably hoping that it was going to. There's a question, therefore, as to what that therefore means for us, as we move through this financial year, as much as it does next year. And then we get into demand and complexity, which just doesn't centre itself within social care. It sits elsewhere in the organisation as well. So, to Councillor Garrick's point, it's not unsurprising. It was known that we were carrying budgetary risk in. It's not a surprise, given the circumstances. I think you're all aware of that we will be disclosing an overspend when we report now in July. But Councillor Garrick's right. This is about being reasonable and proportionate in our action in terms of making sure that we look to address that overspend. And it's we're going to have to make some judgment calls on that, because to push unnecessarily hard will exert a significant amount of pain in the organisation. And if we've got a set of circumstances, for example, that played out in outturn, you will see in the outturn report that John has taken you through. And if you reflect back on a month 6 report and a month 9 report in terms of the level of overspend that we were reporting, and to the point we ended up in outturn, significant levels of grant from Welsh Government that were not expected came through the door. And yes, that put us into a more positive position at outturn. That will be helpful because it's led to us not having to draw as much reserve as we needed to. But we've got to be a bit careful in terms of, to that point, of exerting unnecessary pain in the organisation by way of budget recovery, when a reasonable judgment might be that we might get a similar level of unbudgeted grant at the end of this financial year. So there's work to be done, and that work is being done, as Councillor Garrick knows, and we will be bringing that through rightly through scrutiny now in July before we bring it into Cabinet at the end of July. But it will remain a work in progress. It's not just a a point in time piece of work. There's going to be a lot of ebb and flow as we work through this financial year. We operate in a very complex and volatile environment, more so now than we ever have done. And that presents its own challenges, and that's the types of questions that are being sort of raised by yourself, Councillor Buckler, and others.
Thank you, Peter. It's very much appreciated that these are extraordinary times. I think, Councillor Garrett, you mentioned a recession. Actually, I don't think we have been in recession. I don't think we are in recession. Let's hope we're not. Just a note, Councillor Garrett, you didn't mute yourself, and there were some other...
Many apologies.
It's okay. It's just there were some other voices coming through, but we were able to control that. So just a few questions I have. If I may, I'll rattle through these because some of these you've touched on, just a couple of others that perhaps not. The 5-year reduction in reserves is equivalent to around 33% reduction. Does that make us more vulnerable as a council, and what's the external auditor view on that? You touched on that, John, I know, but it would be great just to address that. Children's social care, clearly the biggest area of overspend. Councillor Buckler's referenced the over £4 million. Your descriptions indicate the potential of a realistic forecasting problem. It wouldn't be unique to a local authority, because how do you realistically forecast for these matters? But is that a particular issue because of the nature of the overspend? And related to children's social care, which I'm particularly focusing on because it is so important and because of the nature of the expenditure that's being incurred. Are you able to point to any information on the numbers of children that we have in the care system, and if that's grown over the last, not only the last year, but potentially over the last 5 years, and if complexities themselves are driving cost, or is it numbers as well? You talked about the CapEx slippage. Just really your thoughts, because there's some indication that there may be some weak project planning, some potentially unrealistic profiling and resourcing of the projects, which would be something that needs to be addressed if that is the case. A quick one, insurance and risk at 4.10 in the management reserves are nearly £1 million. Just wondered why so high. And just finally noting the bold comments that you've made at 5.2 and 5.3, which I think I suggest that all councillors, let alone all members of the committee, really note. I think they're very important words, and they really give reference to the importance of wise and prudent work. And you yourself, Jonathan, have mentioned that overspend should not be covering off service overspends that could be otherwise controlled, because it will leave us in a more difficult position. But could I flag these questions up and just see if there's some points you could just respond to in that? Thank you. And Councillor Garrett, would you like to yourself address these, or would you like to pass these across to John and Pete?
I'm going to have to pass those to John and Pete, Chair, because I thought you were addressing them to John, and I therefore did not write all of them down.
That's okay.
I'm very sorry.
That's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Garrick. I think I'll probably draw in Jane Rogers, Chief Officer for Social Care, at some point as we move through, but I'll probably just rattle through the rest of those quite succinctly. So in terms of our 5-year reduction reserves, we've had a necessary call on reserves in 22-23, and I think those reserves are set aside for periods such as the ones we've just faced, which was an unprecedented year. I think if you put all of the things together, you'd be hard pressed to argue that it wasn't. And similarly, 2023-24, we've got a planned use. We're continuing into a period of financial uncertainty. High inflation remains with us, and as I touched upon, we have this increasing demand for our services. I think I mentioned at the outset that we're looking to the development of the medium-term financial strategy that will update our reserve strategy going forward and review the robustness of those reserve levels. In light of that operating environment, and also with those links to the community and corporate plan. As I said, it is going to be important that future use is made wisely and prudently. We aren't blessed with high levels, and we need to maximise the outcomes of that. In terms of the kind of realistic forecasting around children's services, I think you'll note Table 5 within the report that we've consistently told the same story throughout the year on children's services. We know it's a volatile area, both in terms of demand, but also those relationships that we have with regional partnerships with Welsh Government, and where late grant notifications don't lend themselves to making best use of those resources sometimes that become available. The complexity of those demands within children's social care has really gone through the roof. I was discussing numbers around looked after children some days ago. Pre-pandemic, we were slightly higher in terms of overall numbers. We've seen a single-digit reduction in that. But if we just go back 5 years, those numbers were probably around 60 to 70 children lower in terms of the numbers of children looked after. So this is a significant increase, and the complexity is significant. Off the back of COVID impact, especially, and coupled with market conditions and inflation as we've spoken about. In terms of the capital slippage, I think we've covered the reasons for that. The review needs to be taken in terms of as we move towards 23-24. There's a significant amount of capital investment that's planned, and we need to ensure that that's realistic, and that teams are sufficiently resourced to be able to carry out those works. In terms of the insurance reserve, I think we noted in the report that an actuarial review was carried out during the autumn of 2022. That recommended to us a prudent level of reserve to move forward with. Just to take members through that, we will have a level of cost that we have to incur every year in terms of our claims. Those are for claims that perhaps are not insured. Those that are, we have to meet the excess, and there'll also be claims in the system that that have occurred but we haven't been notified of at the moment. So whilst we build in a level of budget provision, the reserve acts as a guard, I guess, against events that will deviate from our usual trends, and where we may incur significant costs up to our total aggregate liability. So it's right and proper that we maintain an insurance reserve for that purpose, and I'm comfortable that that's at a prudent level for us as an authority. Just quickly, in terms of those paragraphs you highlighted, Chair. I think not so much warnings for the committee, but probably a necessary focus for both the administration and the leadership team as we go through another challenging budget year. I think if we're to build our financial resilience and move services onto a more sustainable footing, that has to be in line with our funding allocations. The effective use of reserves and capital receipts are going to be integral to that. So I think what I'm saying is we need to be clear as an organisation what outcomes are expected from that investment, and ensure that, you know, robust arrangements are in place to monitor the delivery of those, and you know, that the outcomes drive you know, more efficient and effective levels of service delivery that are in line with changing demands upon the organisation. Jane, I don't know if you wanted to come in on the specific children's services point, because I know I've briefly covered over it. Thanks, Chair.
Hello, Jane. It's Jane Rogers, and it would be great, Jane, if you can briefly just respond on that. It's the overall numbers and complexities issue. You know, what's driving the increase in children's services?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the numbers of children looked after, in year end at 2019, there were 173 children who were looked after, and one of those children was an unaccompanied asylum-seeking child. And as of the 19th of June this year, there's 200 children who are looked after by the council, but 10 of whom are unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. So in terms of what's driving some of this, it's from a budgetary point of view. Complexity is in there for certain. That complexity drives the types of placements that we can place children in. Obviously, a more complex child needs a more specialist placement. There's a well discussed national shortage of children's placements across Wales, but also across England too. And there's a significant amount of instability within the placement market for children. So that those factors together do drive some of our spend around children's placements, some of which we can predict and plan for in terms of placement development, the ongoing recruitment of in-house foster carers, but also developments of other types of placements which the authority can use, and the ongoing drive around services which support prevention of children becoming LAC, meaning that we hold a slightly higher level of risk in the community than we might have otherwise been able to. There are, in terms of the forecasting elements, while some of this can be predicted and we can plan out placements and placement progressions for individual children, unexpected things do happen. As John and Peter both alluded to, children's services is a very volatile, complex world. We can get placements that break down quite suddenly, and a child becoming very quickly sort of without a placement that can then sort of take us into very high cost situations. And we can have children that we've been maintaining within the community quite quickly due to family crisis or breakdown require a looked after service which we might not have been expecting. And children can come into the authority with high level of needs sometimes that we don't know about. For example, unaccompanied asylum seeking children.
Jane, I think I'm going to pause you there because we are going to move on. That's been really helpful, and thank you.
No problem.
Thank you very much. And as Chief Officer for Social Care and Safeguarding, you know, clearly we wish you well with the continued work, but it's an area where we can continue to scrutinise as we go through the year, and wish all the colleagues well in what are such important services. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to just remind us of the recommendations that are in front of you as committee members, and I move the report itself and believe that that is now supported by committee members. So we'll move on now to the item 7, Strategic Equality Plan Monitoring Report for 22-23, and invite Matthew Gatehouse to come forward, and Councillor Sandals, and welcome to the meeting. Well, you've been at the meeting, but welcome to the front desk. And to thank Peter Davis and Jonathan Davis for the responses and all the work behind it. Particularly the work behind it, we really recognise if you could pass on to the team. It's been extraordinary work that's gone into this, I know, and under a lot of pressure too. So it really is appreciated. So thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. So we'll move on to the Strategic Equality Plan Monitoring for 22-23. And as I say, welcome to Matthew Gatehouse, who's the Chief Officer for Policy, Performance and Scrutiny, and to Councillor Sandals, who's the responsible Cabinet Member. And I'll pass over to you, Councillor Sandals, if you wanted to pick up the report itself.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Birch's new brief, this area of responsibility is also quite new to me, so I hope you'll bear with me. Firstly, I'd like to thank Matt Gatehouse and all the officers for all the work that's gone into this report. Our community and corporate plan describes the ambition of the Council. Tackling inequality is one of our absolute priorities, and you recall that one of the 6 objectives we set is for Monmouthshire to be a fair place to live, where the effects of inequality and poverty have been reduced. The report I'm bringing today actually reports back on progress made against the objectives set in the previous strategic equality plan, which covered the period 2020 to 2024. This was approved by the previous council, but the things that have been done over the past year have also reflected the direction set by this council in the community and corporate plan. I'll begin work with officers later this year to develop a new strategic equality plan, which I'll present to council in early 2024. But first, here's some background to set the context on the report before you today. The Equality Act 2010 created a public sector equality duty. The aim of this is to ensure that public bodies, like local authorities, consider how they can positively contribute to a fairer society through advancing equality and good relations in their day-to-day activities. It's about making sure that equality considerations are built into the design of policy and the delivery of services. Of course, you'll all be familiar with the integrated impact assessment that accompanies all policy decisions taken at Council and Cabinet, as one example. The other thing we need to do is keep our progress always under review, and that's the purpose of this report. The 6 objectives set in the strategic report are: give children the best possible start in life, overcoming barriers to attainment and opportunity, overcome inequalities in access to economic prosperity, to create cohesive communities, to provide services that are accessible to our public and support our workforce, to create a diverse and inclusive workforce, and to reduce the gender pay gap. For that final objective, you'll see a link to the full gender pay report that was received by Council earlier in the year in your papers. We've held some of these, some events in Monmouthshire recently that you'll know of. Back in January, Caldicot Hub and the Friends of Caldicot Library held a Holocaust memorial event where members of the public, Monmouthshire County Council, Cabinet members and colleagues were all in attendance to hear the stories of survivors, listen to readings and to light candles in the victims' memory. In April, during the holy month of Ramadan, we were proud to invite and welcome members of the Monmouthshire Muslim Association to County Hall to break their fast. The first iftar ever held here was well attended by officers, councillors and families from our Muslim community. We hope to make it the first of many. I'm now going to pass over to Matt to pick up a few highlights, and then with the Chair's permission, we'll be able to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And Matthew Gatehouse.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Sandals. Thank you, Chair. So I don't want to read the entirety of the monitoring report out verbatim. I think the value of these is in members' questions, really. I just want to sort of pick out a few things, if you'll allow me. I think one of the things you'll recognise, this report is quite narrative. One of the things we certainly recognise as officers, and I know that Cabinet are asking us to do, we need to get better at the data aspects around inequality. We need to better understand, that when we talk about people, that there are so many different groups behind those people. And interesting, I think if you look at the BBC Wales news site today, you'll see that the first couple of articles on there are about issues relating to inequality. One of them in the health service, where actually it's, you understand it's so important. You don't just talk about people; you talk about ethnicity, because health conditions can affect people from different ethnicities in different ways, and that's true of so many things. So we recognise at the moment there's a lot more work that we need to do to improve the data. We also need to work hard on increasing reporting of incidents. Not a local issue, but something I think might be recognised by local people. The second article you see in BBC Wales news site this morning was a resident of another county saying just how hard it was to report sort of certain issues as a gay man, and the extent to which those issues are able to come across. And one of the events held earlier in the year, which Councillor Sandals attended, was a piece of work done by our Community Cohesion Officer, Shaz, along with Councillor Sandals and Linda O'Gorman, who was here earlier on the licensing side. The Gwent Taxi Driver Awards, the first sort of thing that's been held of that nature, and part of that was building those links into that community to raise awareness of the importance of reporting hate crime. Because if you think about taxi drivers, they're often at the front line of hate crimes. So it's about using some of these vehicles to grow awareness of issues, to promote training, and increase the likelihood of problems being reported. There are some areas where we've made progress in improving the quality of data, such as the poverty dashboard work undertaken by Councillor Fuchs when she was in the Cabinet, and now passed on to Councillor Sandals. There's also work ongoing, and I won't say too much about this in case it comes to in question at the moment. We have internally to the council I'm going to get the name of this wrong because the name has been amended recently, an inclusive access group with officers from all departments that's overseeing how we can improve things for both residents and members of staff inside the organisation. Now that's focused predominantly on disability access, but one of the things that's really important is each time you come across a policy or an area that needs improvement, you think not just about disability, about neurodiversity, you think about what other groups in society may be experiencing challenges, and can we use this as a lens to try and improve things for everyone. And the other thing I'll just sort of add to close, if I may, Chair, and then sort of open up for questions, is just remembering behind all of these stats, all of these examples are people, and often those are people who struggle for their voices to be heard. They've got lived experiences we need to learn from as public services, and the monitoring report before you today, I think we can certainly improve how this monitoring work is done. I look at this report and it could certainly be better. But as important as that is becoming better at the work we do behind it. I think there's a lot of stuff that happens that probably isn't reflected with as much colour or as much vibrancy as would really it deserves from the work of officers that have been involved in that. And I think anyone that was here for the Iftar event that Councillor Sandals mentioned will really recognise just how incredible it was to see that the Muslim community occupying this chamber in such a sort of wonderful event. And I think that there's a lot of work going on. We can do more, and we need to get better at how we report and evaluate and convey that to you as members, and so this committee can hold us to account for delivery. But Chair, if I may, I'll pause there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Matthew. Well, I'll open it to questions now. And first of all, Councillor Fuchs.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Sandals and Matt Gatehouse for sharing the report and giving a really good summary. So yeah, I've got a few points I'd like to make, if that's okay. So overall, obviously, as Councillor Sandal said, I know the objectives were set by the previous administration, and now, of course, we've got a new corporate and community plan. So we're partly looking back at some objectives that were set previously, and we need to think how one of my questions is around how the next plan will relate to the corporate and community plan, but also to the poverty and inequality action plan that sits under this portfolio. I'm really glad that you mentioned the poverty dashboard, because I think that should also be part of this going forward, and I'm really keen for all councillors to know. I believe that the link to the dashboard was sent to everyone at some point in the last few months, but I do think it would be really valuable to have that link in any documents like this, so all our councillors in real time can see the figures in terms of income, homelessness and so on. I think that's absolutely critical. Objective 2, I just find is very policy speak language. It says overcome inequality in access to economic prosperity. What do we actually mean by that? Do we mean reduce inequality, increase income? I find that quite hard to understand, and I think we do need to use really easy to understand language in the future, please. I'm glad you talked about actual data and stats, because I've got two questions really relating to that. One is on the gender pay gap. Over the lifetime of the plan, how much has it been reduced? So we've got a figure in this document about where the gender pay gap is now, but where has it come from? You know, have we improved it? Also, if you think that the rationale in the plan, in the document, talks about the fact that we've got the bigger gender pay gap is because there tend to be a lot of women in those lower paid roles and in social care and cleaning. So what are we doing to attract men to those roles as well? We need to think about why it's only women that take on caring roles in our society, and do more work to ensure that those lower paid jobs are not just filled by women. A similar question on data around bullying. Sorry, Chair, I hope you'll indulge me. I'm nearly at the end of my questioning. On bullying, I'd really like to, again, have some, I think it'd be helpful when this report goes forward to Cabinet to have those stats on bullying. We're all aware, I'm a school governor at Monmouth Comprehensive School, and we're also all aware going forward of the big challenges around attendance at school now since COVID. Attendance has not recovered to the, it used to be over 95% in most schools, and now it's more like 80%, and it's lower for those children who are on free school meals. So I'd really like to see some focus on that as well in the future. Lots of questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Fuchs. And to be honest, I'm not surprised you had lots of questions, because I did expect that. But we'll hand across now to Councillor Sandals and also to Matthew. Could I just suggest, and I'm just conscious of time, and we're trying to make sure we do get other questions in and finish the agenda appropriately. The item that you flagged up on poverty dashboard and bullying stats, I think, are really suggestions for strengthening the report as we move forward, and that's something that I know you invited in the report itself, Matthew, and may not so much require a response here, but perhaps focus on those that require a response. And I don't know, Councillor Sandals, would you like to kick off, or straight across to Matthew?
I'll hand over to Matthew, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for the questions, Councillor Fuchs. And again, Chair, Councillor Fuchs, if I miss anything, I think I've captured them all. Just let me know. So, how this relates to the community and corporate plan? I think there's a clear objective, as Councillor Sandals mentioned, in the community and corporate plan that aligns to this. probably one of the areas we most need to strengthen that's flagged up in that plan is probably learning from now and embedding some of the work that's been happening nationally, such as the Strategic Race Equality Action Plan launched by Welsh Government, the National LGBTQ plus Action Plan, to make sure that this work, we take from that the things that we can do locally and make sure that those are embedded in our work. We're one organisation amongst many, and we have to learn and work with others to have the maximum impact. The issue on gender pay and how it's reduced over the life of the plan, just bear with me while I pull up the figures. So the report mentions that actually pay has gone up in Monmouthshire, but it's gone up by more for males than it has for females. So as we look at the whole economy, this is not us as a council. Pay for males has increased by 13% since 2020, and that's the May 2023 figure I'm going up to. So 2020 up to May 2023, 13% increase for males, 3.6% increase for females. So clearly the rise in wages for males is far outstripping those for females. And that's actually meant, at a county level, a widening of the gender pay gap. It was 18%, it's now 25%. We're not alone. That's similar to figures that we see elsewhere nationally, and ONS have been doing some work on this. As we look at our own organisation, there's a link in the report to the Gender Pay Gap report from Monmouthshire County Council, which is published annually. And I think it was received by Council back in March. It depends whether you look at the mean or the median of this. If we look at the median figure, the middle salary of earners in Monmouthshire, our gender pay gap was 7.62% in 2020 and is down to 3.95% in 2023. But actually, there's been a marginal increase in the mean gap. So it depends which one you look at. That's gone up from 5.85 to 6.5%.
Matthew, excuse me, I don't want to get too buried in, decimal points around this. It's very important that the key messages come out. I think one of the questions was about attracting men into particular roles that Councillor Fuchs had placed them, whether there are particular aspects of that you also wanted to comment on.
Yeah, thanks very much. So on that issue, it's one of the important things for us as an organisation. We know how tight the labour market is at the moment. We know that how much our colleagues in social services, for that example, are struggling to recruit carers. We want to target every single corner of that labour market to bring people in. We need the best people, irrespective of background, and we desperately need numbers. So, we're actively targeting into sort of all segments of society. I can't give a specific answer, I'm afraid, on the targeting of sort of advertising towards sort of males in the home care thing. But one thing I do know is that we are actively looking at where we can target job adverts to increase reaches into all corners. So that inclusion group I mentioned, we're looking now at which publications and websites that are targeted at people with disabilities, for example, are going to have the greatest reach in terms of increasing our ability to attract disabled applicants into Monmouthshire.
Okay, Matthew, that is very helpful. The other question was on Objective 2 and what it really means. I think Councillor Fuchs was keen to just understand that. And again, if we could keep the responses reasonably brief, because we're a number of questions left. Objective 2,
which I'm just
which is the inequalities,
back up to
which is overcoming inequalities, economic inequalities, and just trying to understand what that means.
And again, I'll try and be brief, but the key thing there, and it probably links back to one of the earlier answers, is different groups are more likely to succeed. We know this, and I'll sort of go back because it's sometimes easy to look at the examples that are immediately before us. But there was a report again, sorry to keep citing the BBC as a news source, I didn't get to read much yesterday, but in Northern Ireland, and it was just highlighting again there the example that women are far more likely to be in poverty than men for a whole series of reasons at a societal level that we have to overcome. So, and what that objective is trying to get at really is that there are things we can do as an organisation and as society that reduce the likelihood of that inequality between different groups pervading. If it's access to broadband, sometimes particularly for older people who can be digitally excluded, that means they get access to better energy or insurance deals. If it's sort of access to better training opportunities for people from backgrounds that may not have succeeded in conventional education. So I appreciate the wording might be a little bit sort of clunky and technical, and we'll try and address that in the next iteration of the plan. But really it's recognising some of those historical imbalances and looking to introduce actions to overcome them.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm going to move on to, and if I could just remind committee members that we're coming towards the end of the agenda. Appreciate if the questions could be succinct and responses too. So to Councillor Bond.
Hey, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for this report and the good work that's being done. And yes, I agree with you for the median versus mean and all the things you've just mentioned. First of all, objective, I've got a few little ones. Objective 1, page 34, the information about Flying Start. We found out on Monday that there's the pilot with Welsh Government and an Iron Bevan Unitary Health Board, a health visitor provision is not working at the moment. I don't know how that affects them, whether you're aware of that. Objective 1, page 36, the Playmaker events and Holocaust were really well used by the individuals, especially young people using for their CVs. Really good events. Thank you very much for that. Objective 4 on page 44. I see that you've only got, well, not only for me, I think only 0.2 first full-time equivalent child and adolescent psychology staff, and your early years integration transformation programme. I wonder if it includes the very important factors which I understand new mothers don't hear currently, about attachment and attunement, and being a good enough caregiver. So a lot of the information I've seen is about after the event, rather than helping young people become the good parents and not storing up issues in individuals as they grow up, with children and young people, and that might end up in prison or either have difficulties. And then objective 5, create a diverse and inclusive workforce. I was quite unsure because there weren't many actions under this, and I wonder what we're doing for the age, religion, belief, sex, race, or the others, because being on the public services, the police hate crime values, the figures are not actually related to numbers, so Monmouthshire might look very good versus race, hate crime or disability, but it's not related to the diversity of our population and the ethnicity. And the other thing was, do we use characteristic-free interviews, or at least the sifting out for interviews at the first stage? And the one last thing, could we consider unconscious bias and prejudice training for all of us? Because we've all got it. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see how we do with these, but I'm going to have to make sure that the responses are succinct, because we are going to be drawing the meeting to a close fairly soon. Councillor Sandals and Matthew.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So just to pick up on a few of those fairly swiftly, yes, thanks very much for mentioning the Flying Start issue. I am aware of it, that emerged at Scrutiny on Monday. I know that Beth Watkins, our Flying Start manager, is sort of contacting colleagues in both Health and Welsh Government about that, and we'll ensure that the committee has an update once we have more to share. The sort of the child and adolescent issue, I'm afraid it's a little more expertise required than I'm able to give, but I will speak to colleagues in our education team, and if that's okay, Councillor Bond, just ask for an update which I'm able to provide to you in writing. But I'd be overstepping my expertise if I tried to give you an answer to that one. The issue of unconscious bias training, absolutely. It's something that we need to introduce as an authority and make that available to both staff and members. It's really, really important. In terms of recruitment, we don't see the sort of equality information when we recruit that first stage. But again, this is a really important topic. There are some positive actions we take, such as guaranteed interviews for people with disability that meet the criteria on the person spec. We do the same now actually for armed forces as part of our Armed Forces Community Covenant. So it's that positive action for people who may be underrepresented.
Can I just add in there, and children looked after as well. They get, a guaranteed interview as well in Monmouthshire.
Yeah, absolutely, really important point. Thank you, Councillor Sandals. So there is positive action that we take. We do need to introduce the unconscious bias training. The other thing we're looking at sort of very quickly through the inclusive access group is how we develop a manager's toolkit to basically alter the techniques and look at different ways of recruiting. So, for example, could that mean people with dyslexia or neurodiversity are able to submit a video application form rather than a written one? So these are all things we're exploring and just checking them each out with our employment solicitor to make sure that we keep the right side of the law as well.
It may be that some of those references could be added to the monitoring report reflecting that, which would be helpful. I need to move us on, and Councillor Crook, I see you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Peter, obviously, is the champion of the armed forces, and he was a little concerned that perhaps on the impact assessment that the armed forces and personnel and plus the veterans' families were not included, and if it couldn't be included in that area, maybe it could be taken to another area which is available. So it's the armed forces and personnel and veterans' families of the impact assessment area.
Thank you, Councillor Crook. It's an important question. And Councillor Sandals?
Yes, thank you. Just to mention, the equality strategy is actually focused on the legal duties that we've got under the Equalities Act 2010, and that is about protected characteristics. And with armed forces, veterans and members, we have an Armed Forces Covenant, which we signed up to in January of last year, I believe, and they are it's really well covered there with the armed forces and veterans. And I hopefully that answers the question. Do you think that answers that?
Yes, I mean, obviously I'm doing this question on behalf of Peter, but obviously he is concerned that it is included in an area wherever possible, really. He's talking about impact assessment, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if I can just add to that one, because quite rightly, Councillor Sandals has covered sort of this report being focused on the legal duties under the Equality Act 2010. One of the ways in which we discharge those duties is through the impact assessment, but that impact assessment is broader than the Act here. It also picks up safeguarding, it also picks up future generations. I'll have to check back. They are discussions we had influenced by a couple of our colleagues from the military, including Mark Lawson, who many of you will know, and we have been in discussion around inclusion of that. We have to be balanced that the more we put into this, the less likely it is that you get quality in other areas, so sort of diluting it. The important thing, I think, with the Armed Forces Covenant is ensuring awareness amongst all officers and members, so that when these policies are coming forward, people are asking those questions about the impact of this on serving personnel and veterans. But thanks very much, and appreciate also Councillor Strong, who's not here today, giving that focus to that area, because it's incredibly important to all of us.
It is important, and I think it was only earlier this week that there was a really poor attendance at the flag-raising ceremony, Armed Forces flag-raising ceremony, and one that doesn't, I think, put the council in a good particular view or line of sight of colleagues in the armed services. So it is a very pertinent area. And finally, Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair. Funnily enough, mine's really a sort of follow-on question from Councillor Strong's question via Councillor Crook. Your objectives are extremely laudable and undeniably needed. But how can you prevent any resentment that might build up, as it could be perceived by some residents that an emphasis on the rights of some groups are more important than others? You know, that's the last thing we want, because obviously your equality mission is, as I said, laudable. So how are you safeguarding against that?
Yeah, thanks very much. It's a really important question, isn't it? You know, particularly as we look at the needs of people who've had particularly challenging times. You know, one of the areas this is sort of most pertinent for me at the moment is, for example, our guests and our sort of new residents who've come in from Ukraine, who we're supporting to live in our county. And you know, to use that as an example, one of the things we've tried to do throughout that is to ensure that the support we offer to those people as they come in is consistent that would be afforded to any local or UK family with a local connection who was at risk of becoming homeless, for example, so that the housing support we give them, any financial assistance at risk of homelessness, is consistent with the degree of support given to that group. At the same time, what we would say is, you know, we know that because of historic injustices and challenges faced by groups across society, sometimes it is necessary to take positive action. Now, that doesn't lessen the outcome for anyone else. So, for example, the positive action to give a guaranteed interview for someone with a disability that meets a set of criteria is a really important step, because that's a group of people who've historically struggled to get access to the job market. Giving a guaranteed interview, you know, that doesn't happen if they don't meet the criteria. You wouldn't employ someone who didn't have the necessary skills and ability, but it just gives them the opportunity to get in front of that interview panel and put their case across. But it doesn't mean that someone else doesn't get their interview. We're doing what we did before, plus an additional bit of assistance for someone who struggled in the past for historic reasons. But I recognise, Councillor Bowser, absolutely, there may be people, particularly when times are so hard and so many people are struggling economically, that may feel that others are getting assistance. But we strive wherever possible to take actions that, well, they may assist some, they don't make others worse off.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Appreciate that, and also for the questions, which are really helpful. I just had one that well, two, if I may, as comments rather than requiring particular responses. In terms of Objective 1, it does, very much about giving children the best start in life. It does, I think, beg the question to what extent we are developing resilience and resilience training amongst our young people in the county. And that might be particularly important for those who are underprivileged or those who are struggling for one reason or another, and be interested in seeing how the report might be able to consider that, if not in this report, moving forward. And secondly, in terms of Objective 2, inequalities, which are stated as economic inequalities, it does seem very pertinent that health inequalities should be very much included there. The link between those and economic inequalities seem extremely strongly linked. So just a real suggestion that you might consider inclusion of making those links. I know that we recognise it. It may well be appropriate to link them. but not points just for response just now, but just some suggestions and refinements, which is what you've requested. So I'm going to move the report that members, the recommendation that you see in front of you, members scrutinise the progress report and recommend any refinements prior to publication. Thank you for everybody who have made those suggestions, and I believe that there are no further any problems with moving the report, so that is done, and we move forward just to conclude the agenda with item 8, Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee Forward Work Programme and Action List. After today, in which I've now been elected to chair and Councillor Wright to vice chair, we'll be looking at the forward work programme. I've had some early discussions with Hazel and with Robert, and looking to try and make sure that we're populating the forward work programme appropriately, and in timing terms that can be very important. In ways that we believe to be helpful in developing good policy, good reporting. Welcome your suggestions on that, and if I could just also say that the approach that we've tried to take, and I think does work, is to try and limit ourselves to 3 main reports and no more in each meeting, rather than trying to cover so many that we can't actually get into any detail in any. That seems to have worked quite well, and I'd suggest that we continue to work in that way. So, we need to be quite careful in prioritising what are the most important reports. But we'll develop that. Moving on to question 9, Cabinet and Council Work Plan for your reference. And item 10, just to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 27th February. Now, many of you were not at that meeting, so but those of you who were, I am happy to confirm that I'm content with those, and I don't see any other comments relating to that, so we'll accept those. And the next meeting is the 17th of July, which goodness knows, that might be in the middle of the next heat wave. I'm going to have to wear my kilt, one of these lightweight ones, to future meetings, I think. In any case, no, you wouldn't like it. You're quite right. You're absolutely right. Shaking heads all round. Okay, but thank you everybody for all your contributions and comments, and for all the responses given during the meeting. It's been very helpful indeed. Thanks again, and I close the meeting.